Hi, everyone. My name is Carly Church, and I'm a human trafficking crisis intervention counselor at Victim Services in Durham region. And I'm also a survivor of domestic sex trafficking, which is really why I want to come and chat a little bit with you all about this topic. It's something that I'm very passionate about, and every opportunity I get to come and speak to young people about human trafficking, I take it. I do truly believe that education is power, and I often wonder if somebody ever came and spoke to me when I was a young person, would this have happened to me? Or would I have been able to identify the red flags before it was too late? So that's really why I want to spend the next 20 to 30 minutes just going over some of the 101 on human trafficking, really defining what it is, debunking some myths and misconceptions, and really painting a picture of how human trafficking happens, from the luring stage all the way to the full-on exploitation stage. And then I want to end our talk today around the warning signs, things to look out for that may be happening to you, or you may be seeing in your school or with other people in your life. So that's really what I want to spend the next little bit of time going over. Before I jump in, though, I did want to do a little bit of a disclaimer. This topic can be heavy. It can be difficult sometimes, and sometimes things can come up for us without us really realizing. So if somebody's feeling triggered, if something comes up for you, please do what you need to. Reach out, access or utilize one of the resources or supports to be able to talk with somebody, take a break, pull somebody aside you trust to be able to have that conversation. So I did want to give that disclaimer before I jump into the meat of the presentation today. I really, though, want to start off by defining domestic human trafficking. I think it's really important for us to understand what is it? What is human trafficking? And there's an umbrella term, really. That word human trafficking is an umbrella term, and there's many forms of human trafficking that fall underneath that, from forced marriage to forced labor to migrant workers to organ harvesting to international sex trafficking to domestic sex trafficking. So as you can see, there's many different things that fall under that term human trafficking. Today, I really want to focus on domestic sex trafficking. Reason being is that is the majority of what we see here in Canada or here in Ontario, and also because that is where my area of expertise lies. Like I said earlier, I am a survivor of domestic sex trafficking, so that's what I really want to focus on today. So when we really define human trafficking, there's actually different definitions out there for human trafficking. There's the UN's definition for human trafficking, there's a criminal code definition for human trafficking, and they're both really quite long and wordy and difficult to remember. So I have a cheating definition. And this definition is really easy to remember. So there's certain elements that need to be present in order for human trafficking to exist. And if you have all of those elements, then you have human trafficking. So really the definition for human trafficking is there needs to be force, there needs to be fraud, there needs to be coercion, and it all needs to be facilitated by a third party or a group of people. So somebody behind the scenes doing it to you and profiting from you. So again, the definition of human trafficking is force, fraud, coercion, facilitated by a third party. You have all those elements and you have human trafficking. The other piece of domestic sex trafficking that I want to define is that word domestic. We hear of domestic trafficking and international trafficking. It's important we differentiate between the two. They're actually very different. So the best way to differentiate between the two is to think of it the same way as you would if you were to walk into an airport. You got two choices. You can take a domestic flight or you can take an international flight. If you take an international flight, it means you're getting on that plane in one country and you are landing in a completely different country. If you take a domestic flight, it means you're getting on a plane in one country and you're landing in the exact same country. It means the same thing when it comes to human trafficking. International human trafficking means you are from one country and you're brought to another country for the purpose of exploitation, for the purpose of trafficking. Domestic human trafficking means you are from one country, either born and raised, or have come to that country, nothing to do with trafficking, lived there however long, and then were trafficked within that country. The majority of trafficking that occurs in Canada is domestic sex trafficking. That means it's happening to the same people that access your school, the same people that live in your neighborhoods, that access drop-in centers, community centers, walk down the same streets in your neighborhood that you do. This is who it's happening to. This is not something that's just happening in other countries, or it's not something that's just happening to people who are brought to our country. The majority of trafficking is domestic sex trafficking in Canada. So from that, because we now have the definition of human trafficking, I still want to kind of debunk some myths and misconceptions, because yes, we have the definition of human trafficking, but I really want to paint a picture of what human trafficking truly looks like. Movies and media portray human trafficking to look one way, and in reality, they actually look quite different than that. So I want to debunk some of those myths and misconceptions. And I can tell you that when I was growing up, like I told you, I didn't really get much education on human trafficking. The education I did get on human trafficking was from the movies. So when I was being trafficked, I had absolutely no idea that that's what was happening to me, or that's what was happening to me, because I thought that it had to look like the movies. One specific movie that really stood out for me growing up, that made me believe that human trafficking looked a certain way, was the movie Taken. Anybody who has not seen this movie, it is a Liam Neeson thriller. It's an action-packed, edge of your seat movie, and it's all about human trafficking. So this is what I thought it was. Anybody who has not seen this movie, I'll give you a brief synopsis of what happens in this movie, and then I'm going to debunk a whole bunch of myths and misconceptions from this movie. So pretty much what happens is these two young girls, they're teenagers. They fly from the States to Paris. They get off the plane in Paris and they meet this charming man outside the airport. He is a complete stranger. They've never met him before. They have no connection to him. He starts to talk to them and offers to share a cab with them. They say yes, and they get in this cab with this complete stranger. He drops them off at the apartment that they're staying at. They tell him that they're staying there alone. So later that evening, he comes back with his business associates. They break into the apartment. There's a dramatic scene where one girl is hiding underneath, or one girl is fighting off two men in the living room. The other girl's hiding underneath the bed. She's pulled from underneath the bed. They're kidnapped. They're forcibly removed. They're taken against their will. They are then moved to another location where they are locked up in separate rooms. They can't escape even if they tried. They're then hooked up to IV drugs. One of the girls actually overdoses and dies. They are then moved to another location where they're paraded out in front of an audience and they're auctioned off. They're bought and sold into the sex trade, and then moved again to another location. This movie is where I got all of my education around human trafficking. So like I said, when I was being trafficked, I didn't know that that's what was happening, because I thought it had to look like this movie. And every single thing about this movie is the exact opposite of what we see here in Canada or here in Ontario. So what I want to do is go through some of those big misconceptions in that movie to debunk and really paint that picture so we can understand what human trafficking truly looks like. So biggest misconception of all is oftentimes people hear that word trafficking and they think movement needs to take place. And movies showcase that all the time, people being moved from one place to the next. It's really important to know that zero movement needs to take place in order for human trafficking to exist. You can be born and raised in Ajax, and you can be trafficked in Ajax. You can be born and raised in Oshawa and trafficked within Oshawa. Zero movement needs to take place in order for human trafficking to exist. The other big misconception from that movie is that it is a much older male trafficking a much younger female. There's really two misconceptions in one here. One being gender. A lot of people believe that only males are traffickers and only females are trafficked. When in reality, anybody can be a trafficker and anybody can be trafficked. Males traffic males, females traffic females, females traffic males, and males traffic females. It can go any which way. The second part of that misconception is a much older person trafficking a much younger person, when in reality, the two parties are usually quite close in age. I can tell you that my traffickers, one was the exact same age as me and one was 2 years older. It looked like we belonged together. If anybody from the outside saw us walking around together, hanging out, there wasn't many questions. It didn't look like there was something that was going wrong. Traffickers know this. So they know that the closer in age they are, the less likely that there'll be questions or eyes on them. So usually the two parties are close in age, or at least can pass as close in age. Other misconception from that movie is it was a complete stranger who trafficked them. They had never met them before, when in reality, you usually know the person who intends on trafficking you. I am not saying it's been your best friend since you were in diapers together, but there is almost always some kind of connector link that causes you to put your guard down and be much more willing to engage in conversation. Maybe you went to the same high school, you grew up in the same neighborhood, maybe it's your cousin's friend's friends, you met once or twice at a party, it's somebody with a lot of mutual friends on social media. There is some kind of connector link that causes you to put your guard down and be more willing to engage in conversation. The other misconception is those girls were kidnapped. There was that dramatic scene where they're pulled out of that apartment, kicking and screaming, forcibly removed. I don't know how many TV shows I've watched where a white van pulls up on the side of the street and pulls two people into the van and drives away. That's not what it looks like. Rarely are you kidnapped. What usually happens is this person begins to build some form of relationship with you, whether that's a companionship, friendship, a romantic relationship, but they start to build that trust with you. They start to provide you with your basic needs. You end up going with that person because you believe that they're going to take care of you. You go with that person because you believe they are going to love you. You go with them because you believe that you love them. You go with them because they've been treating you better than anybody has treated you for a very long time. That's why you go, not because you're kidnapped. So another misconception that kind of goes along with this one, and we see it in the movie, is that those girls were locked in separate rooms. They couldn't escape even if they tried. And in reality, what we normally see is that it feels like there's invisible chains, or it feels like there's invisible bars, but you're not in fact tied up or locked up. You stay because you feel as if you leave, nobody is ever going to understand you in the way that they do. You feel as if you leave, nobody's going to be there for you or support you, or your needs are not going to be met. So again, it feels like there's that psychological hold, those invisible bars. You feel like if you leave, life isn't going to be the same. It's scary to walk out that door. You feel as if you leave, nobody's going to love or treat you this way ever again. So that's often why you stay, not because you're tied up. The other two misconceptions I have are drug use and physical violence. And these are misconceptions where I'm not going to say that these things don't often happen, because physical violence is oftentimes a part of your exploitation. We do see it in a trafficking situation quite often, but not to the extent that it's portrayed in movies or media. I don't like to give pimps a lot of credit, but they are savvy business people. And at the end of the day, they're not going to damage the product that they're selling. They're going to find alternative ways to keep you there, and it is almost always through psychological manipulation. So that physical violence, when it's present, it is usually at the beginning. It's usually to instill fear. So the threat alone is enough to keep you there. The ultimatum is enough to keep you there. Physical violence can be reintroduced if the individual maybe starts to be non-compliant or doing things they're not supposed to. They may reintroduce it, but usually what traffickers utilize is that psychological hold, that emotional threats, ultimatums, because again, they don't want to be detected. And bruises or injuries are things that can be detected. More questions will be asked. So they try to stay away from the physical violence as much as they can. And then drug use, why I have this as a misconception is because a lot of people have an image sometimes in their mind of who is being trafficked. And oftentimes they believe that the only people who are being trafficked are those who are struggling with homelessness, maybe struggle with mental health concerns, substance use, come from a broken home, access drop-in centers, shelters. And yes, this can make somebody more vulnerable or susceptible to being trafficked, but no, not everybody who's being trafficked falls under that. Oftentimes young people that I work with, they go to school Monday to Friday. The trafficker picks them up Friday after school. They tell their parents that they're going to a friend's house for the weekend. The trafficker brings them out of town for Friday night and Saturday night and traffics them and brings them back home for curfew Sunday. This is still human trafficking. You do not need to be missing in order for human trafficking to exist. This can still be human trafficking. And then finally, the last misconception I want to touch on is that a lot of people often believe that all sex work is inherently human trafficking. And it's really important for us to differentiate those two, because there is laws around sex work and there are laws around human trafficking. And the moment I conflate those two, I'm not going to be able to best support somebody and cater my interventions to where they are. So it's important that we separate the two. So oftentimes we'll say that people enter the sex trade for a variety of different reasons. And we can break them down into three main reasons and look at them as a spectrum of experience. So on one end of the spectrum, you have choice. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you have coercion or human trafficking. And in the middle, you have circumstance. So when we're talking choice, this means you are a consenting adult. You have to be over the age, you have to be 18 or older in order to consent to sex work. Nobody under the age of 18 can consent to working in the sex trade. It will never be consensual. So choice, you have to be 18. a consenting adult. You have to make this decision of sound, coherent mind, where nobody is pressuring you into entering the sex trade, where you get to choose what you do, when you do it, when to stop, and you get to keep all your money. So every time you engage with somebody, it is in fact consensual. Opposite end of the spectrum is human trafficking or coercion. This is when somebody has tricked you, manipulated you, coerced you, or given you an ultimatum into entering the sex trade, and now you're behind, and they're now behind the scenes doing it to you and profiting from you. So they might be taking your photos, posting your ad, telling you what to do, what to wear, who to have sex with, how many people to have sex with a day, and then taking your money at the end of the day. So every time you engage with a customer is in fact not consensual sex work. Consent can never be made under pressure. And in the middle is where it gets a little bit murky. This is where somebody's circumstances are inherently exploitive, but there is no third party behind the scenes doing it to you or profiting from you. So sometimes poverty can exploit people, mental health can exploit people, addiction can exploit people. But again, there's nobody behind the scenes doing it to you or profiting from you. So the only one along the spectrum that is in fact human trafficking, that has all four elements of force, fraud, coercion facilitated by a third party, is the coercion C. It does not mean that somebody in the circumstance C or the choice C does not need support. It just means the way that I'll support somebody looks different along the spectrum. And that is why we differentiate between the two, so that we can meet people where they're at and cater interventions to where they identify. So these are some of the main myths and misconceptions. So I hope that after giving the definition and now really debunking some myths, we have a really solid idea of what human trafficking truly looks like in an Ontario context. So now what I want to walk everybody through is what we call the stages of commercial exploitation. Because oftentimes what people will ask after I kind of define and debunk human trafficking is they'll say, well, if you're not kidnapped, if you're not tied up, if you're not locked up, if you're not beaten every day, then why do you stay? You know, how does that happen? And this is the process that I want to walk everybody through. There's 5 stages, and I'll walk you through each stage. And that should really paint a picture of how psychological this is and how this truly can happen to somebody without us even realizing sometimes until we're fully exploited. And that's why we want to provide this information and knowledge, so that we're equipped with all the information, the tools, so that we can protect ourselves from this. Again, like I said, education is power, knowledge is power. So I'm going to share really quickly, or well, maybe not really quickly, but I'm going to walk you through these stages on how this truly happens. So in the luring stage, this is the first stage. So this is when your trafficker is actually beginning to assess your vulnerabilities. This is when a trafficker is actually looking for somebody who is vulnerable. They might be looking for somebody who is being bullied in school, somebody that doesn't have a lot of friends, is struggling to meet friends. They're looking for somebody who maybe is shy or distant, struggles to make eye contact, somebody that doesn't have brand name clothing or a brand new iPhone, maybe is having problems at home or doesn't live at home with their caregivers. This is who a trafficker is looking for. Once they assess those vulnerabilities, or they feel they found somebody who is vulnerable, they're going to start to put feelers out. They're going to start to test the waters. They're going to see if you're interested in buying what they're selling. And they do this by asking a million questions. And it does not feel like you're being interviewed, and it does not feel like you're being interrogated. It feels incredibly, incredibly special. That for once somebody stopped to notice you were struggling and asked you about it. That for once somebody took time out of their life to get to know about yours. They're going to ask you about your family, your friends. They're going to ask you about your struggles. They're going to ask you about your hopes and dreams for the future. And you're probably going to tell them everything, because you've been waiting a really long time for somebody to stop and ask you these questions. What they're really doing is they're gathering information that they're later going to use against you. But in that moment, it feels incredible. The other thing they'll do in this luring stage is they'll often look at your basic needs and identify what basic needs might be lacking or not currently being met in your life. And once they identify those, what they're going to do is they're going to move you to the grooming and gaming stage. This is, we also refer to as the honeymoon stage, because oftentimes, I think it's about approximately 85% of my clients actually identify their trafficker to be a romantic relationship. Even the other 15%, it actually becomes very relational, a friendship, a companionship, somebody who's going to take care of you, or in fact, a family member that could potentially be doing this. So what happens in this grooming and gaming stage is, once they've identified what's been lacking in your life, or what you've identified to them has been lacking, they start to meet all of those basic needs in this grooming and gaming stage. If you told them you didn't have a safe place to stay, they're going to offer you a safe place to stay. If you told them that you're struggling to make friends. They're going to introduce you to all their friends. They're going to make you feel a part of something, that sense of belonging, that sense of family. They might take you shopping. They might take you out to eat, begin to wine and dine you. They're going to begin to shower you with compliments, boost your self-esteem, boost your self-worth. They are going to tell you they're going to keep you safe, that they're going to be there for you, that they're going to take care of you. If drugs are involved, they could give them to you freely. If drugs aren't involved, that's okay. They might keep it that way, or they potentially could introduce them in a more playful way. Going to that party tonight, what do you need? What they're doing is they're trying to make it feel as if this is the best your life has ever been. They're going to begin to talk to you about a future together, plans you're going to achieve in the future, things you're going to do together in the future. They're going to continue to be interested in your life, continue to ask you about your life. It really, really does feel as if this is the best your life has ever been. Even if your life was not that bad before, they've taken the time out of their life to really understand what's been lacking in yours and have now provided those things to you. It's really difficult to see any red flags in this stage. The biggest red flag is it is too good to be true. And who wants to believe that it is too good to be true if nobody has ever treated you this way before? The red flags don't come in until the next stage. So the next stage is the coercion and manipulation stage. This is when they're going to give you all that love and affection, and then they're going to pull it all away. And they're going to give you all that love and attention, and then they're going to pull it all away. So it feels like you're walking on eggshells. You're wondering, are they going to have a good day today, or are they going to have a bad day today? You actually start to think in your mind, what did I do wrong? I must have done something wrong, because I know they're capable of treating me better than anybody has ever treated me before. So I must have done something wrong. You actually start to feel indebted in the relationship. You start to feel as if they've done so much for me in this relationship. What have I done to give back? Oftentimes it gets to the point where you actually start to offer to do things. And as soon as you start to offer to do things to give back in this relationship, this is often when they start to stretch your boundaries, your morals, and your values. They'll start to ask you to do things that they know you're not comfortable doing. Maybe things you disclosed to them back in the luring stage, that you said, that's something that you won't do. And they said, no problem. Now in the coercion and manipulation stage, they're more likely to bring it up again. And you're more likely to do it because you just wanted to go back to that honeymoon stage. So they're going to start to slowly do those things, ask you to do things you're not comfortable doing. And then they'll slowly start to reward you for them. They can be sexual or not sexual. They could ask you to lie for them. They could ask you to commit a crime. They could ask you to look out while they commit a crime. And immediately after, they'll give you all that love and affection back. Then they pull it away. Eventually, it may become things that they start to do that start to stretch your sexual boundaries. They may ask you to send that naked picture they've been begging you for. They may ask you to make a video with them or have sex with one of their friends. And again, immediately after, they're going to give you all that love and affection back. And slowly over time, they're going to start to do something that we can sometimes call conditioning, where they have sex with you and shortly after take you shopping. Or they have sex with you and take you to get your hair done, your nails done. And over time, that will get replaced by cash. Or they'll have sex with you and $30, $60 and be like, oh, baby, that's amazing. Go treat yourself. Go do something nice for yourself. Your brain actually starts to associate sex with a reward, sex with money. So now not only have they broken down your morals, your boundaries, and your values, but they've started to desensitize you to certain sexual acts and then reward you for them. What they're doing is slowly preparing you for the sex trade. The final thing they do in this coercion and manipulation stage is they build a wedge between you and anybody who's healthy in your life. They want to isolate you from anyone healthy. They want to distance you from anybody healthy. They do this by picking fights with your family, your friends. They might bring up scenarios that you disclosed to them that really affected you at one point. And they're going to bring them up again. And they're going to amplify it and blow it up and talk about how somebody who loves you would never do those things to you, that they would never do those things to you, that they will always be here for you. Again, they want to distance you from people who they feel are healthy and might start to identify the red flags. I used to work with somebody where their trafficker used to go into their phone and delete messages from loved ones who were reaching out and then block them to the point she thought that nobody else cared about her, that he was the only one that she could depend on. This is when they have you where they want you. And this is when they'll move you to the full-on exploitation stage. This is when they actually bring up the idea of working in the sex trade, which they can do in a variety of different ways, but it's usually either very direct or the exact opposite, incredibly insidious. If it's direct, they're literally going to say, look at all the stuff I've done for you. The hotel or condo you've been staying in, the food I bought you, the drugs I provided, all these things, they're not free. You owe me money, and this is how you're going to pay me back. And if you don't, They've got all the ammo they need to use against you to get you to say yes. They've learned everything about you in the luring stage. That's why they took the time to understand every single thing about your life, is because now they can use it against you. And they might say, if you don't do this for me, it must mean you don't love me. If you don't do this for me, you mustn't appreciate me. I'm going to find somebody who loves and appreciates me as much as I would appreciate them back. If you don't do this for me, then I'm going to hurt you. If you don't do this for me, I'm going to get your little sister to do it. I'm going to hurt your family. You know exactly what to say to use against you. If it's insidious, they're going to play off all that information they gained from you in the luring stage. And maybe way back in the luring stage, you told them that your dream for the future was to one day create your own loving, supportive family. Maybe you told them that growing up, you never had that, and you saw some of your friends have it, and that's all you ever dreamt of, to one day get married, buy a house, have kids, and really create that loving, supportive environment. So they might say something to you like, you know, that life you want to have, that house you want, that wedding you want, those kids you want. I love you so much, and I don't want to wait any longer. I have this crazy idea. We'll make stacks of cash. We'll put a down payment on that house, and then we're going to be able to start that life together. And no matter what, I'm going to be there. No matter what, I'm going to love you. Of course, you're going to say yes. They just sold you a dream. They sold you your exact dream that you told them about way back in the luring stage. And again, once you take your first trick, they got everything they need to keep you there. This is what human trafficking truly looks like. This is why it's so complex. This is why it's so psychological, and why sometimes it's so difficult to see until you're fully being exploited. That's why it's so important to understand these stages and learn about this. Again, this can be a heavy topic. It can be hard to really talk about, but it's really important because in here, there's so many red flags that you can learn about, that if this starts to happen to somebody that you know or to yourself, you're going to realize these red flags before, and will be able to reach out and ask for help. The final stage is the recruitment stage. And this is where we often saw traffickers putting the top, their top person, the one they've been with the longest, in the role of recruiter. It becomes a part of your exploitation. If you're with a trafficker for long enough, they are going to actually want to be more hands-off, so there's less physical evidence pointed to them. So they're in fact going to teach somebody how to recruit other young people, how to identify somebody who's vulnerable, take them through the luring and grooming process, all the way to where the woman in the role of recruiter is often the one in charge of booking hotel rooms and taking photos and teaching them lingo and all of that. And this becomes a part of your exploitation because now your trafficker can incriminate you even more. People always ask me, well, Carly, why would somebody say yes to recruiting for their trafficker? And to me, it makes sense, because if you've been stripped of all your power and control, you're told every single day when to eat, when to sleep, who to look at, what to wear, who to have sex with, how many people to have sex with a day. And you get the opportunity, because it feels like one, to regain some of that power and regain some of that control. People will often say yes. It becomes self-preservation and in fact instinctual to say yes. The other reason why somebody will say yes to the role of recruiter is because it's survival. If you have to put yourself in less risky situations every single day, you're going to say yes. So it's really, really important that we see individuals who are put in the role of recruiter as survivors and victims themselves. I will work with individuals who are put in that role of recruiter because it becomes a part of your exploitation. You do not stop being victimized when you're put in that role. And I talk about this because I want to remove the stigma and the shame. Oftentimes, young people are forced into this position and feel like they do not deserve support or help because they have recruited. But it is not your fault. If you've been taken through these stages and your trafficker asks you to recruit, it is a part of your exploitation. You don't get to say no. And I understand that piece. So I want to remove that shame and self-blame and stigma around that piece, and that there is help. And that people can access services if they've been placed in the role of recruiter. Now that we really have a good idea of the definition of human trafficking, what it truly looks like in an Ontario context, and how it actually happens from somebody from the luring process all the way to the full-on exploitation, I want to end with one last thing, and just to give you a few warning signs to look out for. And some of these warning signs are things that will come up when people are starting to be recruited into a trafficking situation, but also sometimes when you're fully entrenched. So some of those warning signs might be language. Sometimes there's a whole vocabulary to the sex trade. So when people start to shift and use different language or lingo, slang words that they haven't used before, this could be a warning sign. Or it could be somebody trying to make a disclosure, but they only know how to disclose in this way. So there's certain words and terms that are derivatives of the sex trade that could be used. So it's really important if you notice somebody, or if yourself, you're learning new words from somebody to, and you don't know what they mean, to ask. Because they could mean things that you weren't sure about. It could also be a big warning sign that somebody may be involved. So it's something to think about. Other warning signs might be things like excessive primping. There could be a stereotypical look to the sex trade where somebody has their hair done, their nails done, their lashes done, but these are just warning signs. Everybody that does those things does not mean they're all being trafficked. But again, it's something that if you're noticing a marked change in appearance, maybe your friend used to dress and look a certain way, and now they're dressing and looking a completely different way, could be a warning sign. It's something to be aware of, that these could be things. More so than that, it's unexplained clothes, hair, nails, jewelry, items. And to even ask yourself, if somebody brand new that you barely know or just starting to get to know want to buy you all of these things, it's really, could that be a warning sign? Is there something that they want in return for that? And it's a warning sign if we sometimes see somebody who is a young person who maybe doesn't have a lot of money to be able to pay for all that stuff, who's giving them these things. So that could be a warning sign. Moving all the time, frequent relocation, being moved from one city to the next, living out of hotels, that could be warning signs. A new friend that wants to bring you to a hotel all the time, that could be a warning sign. If somebody's neglecting healthcare needs, oftentimes that's a big warning sign. If you're constantly being moved from one place, if you're being controlled, or if you're fully entrenched in a trafficking situation, oftentimes the trafficker isn't going to allow you to go to medical appointments or things like that. They want to know where you are. And sometimes medical appointments are things that professionals may start to see red flags. So you may not be going to those things. Other warning signs you might see is not being able to come to school all the time. Maybe you have friends who used to be involved in sports or extracurricular activities with you, and now they're no longer. Or they have a new group of friends and they no longer hang out with an old group of friends. Maybe they're disinterested in things that once used to make them really happy and excited. Maybe on Mondays they used to come to school and want to tell you all about their weekend, and now they're very private and closed off and don't want to share a lot of information. They seem a little bit disoriented or isolated from the outside world. They're being very secret or protective. Maybe they have a new relationship and it has signs that it could be controlling or abusive. Maybe that person picks them up and drops them off everywhere they go, or wants to know where they are at all times. Or before they can hang out with you, they got to check in with their boyfriend or girlfriend to make sure it's okay. Those could be red flags. If somebody doesn't get to hold their own identification, they don't have their driver's license on them, they don't have their passport or their health card on them, and it's not their family who's holding it for them, it's somebody else, that could be a red flag. Or if somebody ever wants to take your ID from you, saying, I want to hold this for you so you don't lose it, that could be a red flag. Nobody should ever hold your ID. If somebody has two phones, or if somebody's always changing their phone number or using text now apps, that could be a warning sign. Tattoos, signs of branding. Oftentimes, if somebody's fully entrenched in a trafficking situation, a trafficker may brand the person that they're trafficking. And then finally, the other warning signs that I think are incredibly important are exhibiting behaviors of hypervigilance. If somebody seems nervous all the time, fidgety, looking out the windows, the doors, can't sit still, that could be a red flag that that there's been trauma, or that something is going on that is leaving them a little bit fearful. So these are some warning signs. And again, I want to point out that if somebody has one of these warning signs, I don't want anybody to immediately jump to this person could be trafficked, but it's important to know these things and to reach out to somebody who's a trusted adult or professional who you can ask, if you are concerned about somebody, and can kind of find out what you can do in next steps. So this is really where I want to end today. I want to thank everybody for joining this session and learning a little bit about human trafficking. And I hope that everybody has something that they can take away from this, something that maybe they learned from this. And I always challenge everybody, when you have a conversation about this and you're learning about these things, I challenge everybody to keep the conversation going. The way we're going to be able to bring awareness and really combat human trafficking is by talking about it. So I always challenge people to share something you learned with maybe a family member when you go home, maybe a friend, in order to continue to bring awareness to this ever-growing issue. So thank you so much for joining today. And I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their day.